Hello and welcome, my name's Ryan, I'm also known as RM2K Dev. Now today we're going to be doing a simple core data tutorial. I'm just going to show you guys how to save some information and also how to pull that information back. So I'm just going to create an empty iOS application. I'm going to call this core data YouTube. I'm going to leave my organization and identifier set as com.test. The language we're going to be using is Swift. We're going to be working for the iPhone, and you also need to make sure that this box down the bottom here is ticked that says use core data. Now by having that box ticked, it's going to create us it's going to create us all of our core data object context. So we'll get our NS managed object context inside of our AppDelegate, which we'll be using to access our SQLite file, which is the SQLite version, which we use in core data to store information. So I'm just going to start off by creating a storyboard. So just jump down into user interface, select storyboard, and it's going to be for the iPhone. I'm just going to create that in my project folder. What this will give us is a blank storyboard. Now I'm going to drag a simple view controller onto this, and on that view controller we'll have two text boxes and two buttons. So I'm just going to place my text boxes down now, line them up. Just a quick tip, if you hold down the Alt key and drag on an existing component, you will get a duplicate. I'm going to put my button on the right hand side and I'm going to duplicate that over and place one on the left hand side. Now these two buttons, I'm going to call the one on the right save, and I'm going to call the one on the left load. And that's going to be the basis of our storyboard. Actually what I'll do is I'll add two pieces of placeholder text in the text boxes. The first one will be username, the second one will be password. From here I'm going to jump back to our AppDelegate, and if you have a look at our application, we basically have the creation of a blank window, which we no longer need because we're going to be using a storyboard. So if you get rid of these 4 lines of code, and including the comment, that will allow our application to load a storyboard instead of creating a blank window for us. The next thing we need to do to get our storyboard working is just jump back into this core data YouTube or whatever you've named your project in the top left, and under deployment info where it says main interface, select storyboard.storyboard, and that's just because that corresponds with the name of the storyboard that I've got. Now I'm going to save my project and quickly run that to see what happens. I've got my iPhone simulator over here on the right hand side, and you'll see we have the two text fields and two buttons. Now currently none of this does anything, but it's a good start. So I'm going to stop our application from running, and I'm just going to jump back into our AppDelegate. So now we've got this storyboard with our view controller here. We need a view controller class for this, so I'm just going to right click on our project, select new file. It's going to be a source type under iOS, and it's going to be a Cocoa Touch class. It's going to be a subclass of the UI view controller, so if this is not selected, just drop that down and make sure that's your default. And I'm just going to call this VC main. That's just going to stand for view controller main, and also make sure the language is set to Swift. Now this view controller is going to be what we use to control our view, hence the name view controller. We don't need the init function here, so I can get rid of that. Our storyboard will handle that for us, and I'm going to get rid of these comments here as well. I'm also going to shrink down these chunks of code here. The view did load and did receive memory warning, as we won't be using those either in this tutorial series. Now the first two things that we're going to need to create are some outlets, and they're going to be for our text fields. So I'm just going to add a @IB outlet, and that's going to be var txt, that's going to be username, and it's going to be of the type UI text field. I'm also going to add another IB outlet. It's going to be var txt password. It's also going to be of the type UI text field, and I'm going to put the exclamation mark at the end there. Now we have two buttons on our window. We need to create actions for these, so I'm going to create two actions. IB action. The first action is going to be an event for our save button, so I'm going to call this button save. And the second, it needs to say func. The second action is going to be our load action. So I'm going to add another action, IB action func btn load. There we go. So now we have the basis of our saving and loading. We need to tie all of these events up so that we can access the properties. So jump back into your storyboard. We're going to tie all of these events together now. So if you select the actual view that we're using here and go over into your, I can't remember what this one here is called, I can never remember these, the file inspector. We need to select the, what's this one? The identity inspector. That's going to allow us to change the class that controls this view. If you click this little drop down, you will find, and scroll through it, you'll find a bunch of controllers that could, potentially run this view, but we've actually created one ourselves, and it was VC main. So scroll to the bottom, find the one that you created, and select that. Now what that means is that this view here is going to have basically access to all of the methods and functions that are in this class that we've created here. Now since we've added some outlets and actions, and they've been prefixed with the @IBOutlet and IBAction, you'll notice that our storyboard will now be able to access those. So if you right click on text username and select new referencing outlet, click the little plus icon and drag that up to the VC main, you'll notice that we get a bunch of options, and these correspond with those IB actions that IB outlets that we created earlier. So I'm going to link these text boxes up, text username to the username. I'm going to right click on the password field. I'm going to create a new referencing outlet for that, and that's going to correspond with the txt password. Now we need to have two events for these button click events. So I'm going to right click on our save button. I'm going to choose the touch up inside, and I'm going to drag that to our view controller, and that's going to give us the actions. And I'm going to select btn save, and I'm going to do the same thing for load. This time I'm going to use touch up inside, back to our view controller, and I'm going to select btn load. Just make sure I put save as save. Yep, save is set to save and load is set to load. Now we can do some simple testing with this. If we jump back into our VC main, I'll put a println function, and I'm just going to say save button pressed, and I'm going to do the same thing for our load button, println load button pressed. And if I save this and run the project, you will notice now that the buttons will correspond to these events, and we should see them in our console. Save button pressed, load button pressed. So that's good. Now let's make sure that our outlets are working. So I'm just going to add a reference to txt username.text for the save button. And these are just references, so I'm not actually doing anything useful here, but I'm just making sure that the events are all tied together. And the password for the load button. Now if I rerun that application, what you should see now, if we enter some text, this was username, and this is password. If we select save, you should see save button pressed, this was username. And if we select load, you should see load button pressed, this is password. So that means that all of our outlets and actions are now set up correctly with our view from the storyboard. We can now begin with some core data functionality. So up here where we import UIKit, I'm going to add another import, and this import is going to be core data. This will give us access to all of the classes and things that we use inside of core data. Now I think the first thing that we need to do is save some data into our database. So I'm going to get rid of our debug print lines because we've established that these events are linked and working. And I'm going to start by grabbing a reference to our AppDelegate. Now this is our AppDelegate here. So when our application is created, you'll notice if we scroll down that we have a whole bunch of managed object content, NS managed object context variables that have been created for us, and it handles our persistent storage, and that's basically how it saves the data into our core data youtube.sqlite file using our persistent storage, so that when we close the application and open it again, that data will come back. All of this is contained within our AppDelegate. So when we're inside of our view, we need a reference back to that AppDelegate. Now in Swift, we do that like this. We create a new variable to store our AppDelegate. So I'm going to call this AppDel, and it's going to be of type AppDelegate. Now the type AppDelegate basically means it's going to be using this one specifically because we've created this class inside of our project. Now jump back into your VC main.swift, and we're going to say it's equal to, I'm going to say that this one is equal to UI application dot shared application and dot delegate. So this gets our UI application delegate, but this is currently in the UI app delegate class. So basically we need to get this as an app delegate of our project. So I'm just going to say as app delegate, and this brings it back to us. It basically casts this delegate, which is of the type UI application delegate, to our app delegate, which is this class over here, which inherits from the UI application delegate. If that makes sense, because there was a lot of the word delegate there. So I hope that made sense. The next thing we need to do, since we've got our app delegate, is we need to get our managed object context from our app delegate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a reference to our context. It's going to be, I'm just going to say context, and it's going to be of type NS managed object context. It's going to be equal to the AppDel, since we now have a reference to our delegate, and it's going to be the managed object context. So basically now we have a reference to our managed object context. We're able to save and load information to our SQLite file. So now that we've got this reference, we need to create a, actually before we create anything, we need to set up our data model. So if we go into our core data youtube.xc data model and we select add entity, you'll see that it gives us an entity in the top left hand corner here. I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to change it to say users, because that's going to be what we call this table. If you think of these entities as tables, it makes a bit more sense. Now the attributes we're going to add are, if I select this plus button, we're going to add username, and it's going to be of type string. I'm going to add another one, password, and it's going to be of type string. So basically we're going to be saving users into this. So that's done for our data model. We've defined the table, and we've also defined the columns that our table will contain, and also the data type that they should hold. So if we go back to our vcmain.swift file, we can now begin to create a user. So I'm going to say var new user. It's going to be equal to ns entity description dot insert. It's going to be new object for entity name. Now the entity name is going to be the table, so we're going to be inserting this object into users, and the managed context that we're going to be using is the context that we got back from our application delegate. So we're going to be using context. There we go. So now we have a new user that's going to be inserting itself into the database. Oh, one other thing we need to do to that is we need to cast that back to a NS managed object. So we need to say as NS managed object. There we go. So that gives us a, oh, that's weird. Why have we got a storyboard linking to that? That's strange. I think XCode might be having a bit of an issue there. That's fine. Anyway, so now we've got this NS entity description that's being created for us, and it basically, that returns an object of type any object, but it actually is an NS managed object, and then we cast that back to an NS managed object so that we get the properties and methods that we need to use. So now those methods that we need to use, we need to set the information into our data model. So I'm going to say new user dot set value, and it's going to be the type that says for key. Now the first value is going to be, I'm just going to put a test one in here. I'm just going to say test username, and it's going to be for key, and the key is going to be username, as that's corresponding directly to the table, so the column name of our table, which is username. So back in VC main, I'm just going to create another one of these, new user dot set value. The value for this one is going to be test password. It's also going to be for key. This one's going to be password. So now basically now we've got an object that's been created inside of the users table. It's setting the username to test username and the password to test password. And it's going to be doing that in the managed context of context, which refers to our managed object context, which comes from our application delegate, which saves that to the persistent storage in our core data youtube.sqlite file. So the final thing we need to do in order to get this to save is say context.save, and you could add error handling at this point, but I'm not going to bother with that for this short tutorial. In order to add error handling, you would just create an NS error and handle that appropriately. And the final thing I'm going to do in this function is just say println. I'm going to print the new user object to the console. And then I'm also going to print another line. It's going to say object saved, period. Now if we save our project and run that, we should, if I put some details in here and hit save, we will get a object saved into our database. So what you'll see here is our NS managed object going to the entity of users. You'll see that the password has been set to test password and the username has been set to test username, and you'll also see that our object has been saved once we've reached the bottom of that function. The next thing that we need to do is load some of that information back into our application, and we're going to do that in a very similar way, except this time we're going to be loading. So over here in our button load function, we're going to copy these top two lines, because this is going to be our reference to the application delegate and the context held within that application delegate, and we need those because we need to access the database. So the next thing we do is we need to create a request. So I'm going to say var request. It's going to be equal to an NS fetch request. We're going to use the entity name of users. So basically we're asking our database to perform a request on the users table. Oops, I put a semicolon. Can't seem to get rid of those semicolons even though we're using Swift. So once we've got our request, the next thing we need to do is say request. Now this is optional, but I'm going to do this anyway. Returns objects as false equals false. I was getting some errors in my test project before where the objects were coming back as false. Basically, this basically means that you don't get the actual object back until you actually cast it into an NS managed object and use it. But it returns you a reference to the object even though it doesn't exist, and it's really weird. So I'm just putting this in there for that. Now the next thing we need to do is actually execute this request. So I'm going to say var results. It's going to be an NS array because we're going to get back multiple results, obviously, if they exist. It's going to be equal to the context. So we're going to ask the context to execute a fetch request. The request is obviously going to be request, and for the error handler we're going to pass in a nil because I'm not going to worry about handling any sorts of errors in this video. But if you do have errors, just make a NS error object and pass that in there and handle that appropriately. So now we've got an array of results. We can simply say something like if results.count is greater than 0, then perform this code, else perform this code. Now if the results is not greater than 0, it means it was 0 or error or -1 or something like that. So we're basically going to say println, not paint, println. We're going to pass into that a string basically saying 0 results returned, potential error. I think that's what potential error. Because there may have been an error, but we're not handling that at the moment. We're just saying that results has come back and there wasn't any, so 0 results returned or there was an error. If there was a result, what we're going to do is we're going to say for, I'm just going to say res stands for results in results. So we're basically using those new for loops that have been introduced with Swift. And I'm just going to say println, and I'm going to say res for the moment. What's this warning? Yep, res is any object, that's fine. What I might do in here is add a NS managed object. NS managed object, just so that it has a, it doesn't like that. Of course, because results doesn't come back as an NS. Alright, that's fine. We'll leave that with a warning for now and we'll resolve that in a second. So basically, just to go over what we've done, when you select the load button, it gets a reference to our context through the application delegate. It then creates a request of a type of NSFetch request, looking at the users table. It sets this return objects as false property, which basically stops some weird stuff from happening. Then we basically ask our context to execute that request, and we check to see if we have any results come back. If we do, we print them out to the console, and if we don't, we print out this 0 results return line. So let's run our application and have a look what happens. Now if I select the load button, what you should see is test password and test username. The reason we see this is because in the previous time that I ran the application, when we just completed our save button, we actually saved that into the database. So now if I save another one and I load the application again, you'll see that now we have 2 instances of test password and test username. Now there is a slight bug with this. I'm not sure if it's a bug, maybe someone can point this out to me or point me in the right direction here, but I actually was unable to get the UI text fields to stream their text information into this new user.setValue function. So for instance, if I were to say, instead of test username here, txt username.text, it simply wouldn't work. Now I did find a way around this, and that was to simply make a string and append the text from the username to that, and that seemed to fix the issue. But I'm not too sure what was happening there, so if anyone could elaborate on why this is working, and why text username is working in this format compared to why text password or text username wouldn't work in that format, that would be great. I'm not sure if it's a bug with the new SDK because this is a beta, so that might be a potential issue. But yeah, basically if you append your username and password to an empty string, it will work fine. So let's run our application again. Now that I've made that change to our save function, I'm going to add Ryan's username in the username field. I'm going to add Ryan's password in the password field. There's 2 S's in password. And select save. What you'll see is our object has been saved. Now, if I load the objects, you'll see that we have the 2 test username objects have been returned to us. And finally, the Ryan's password and Ryan's username object have been returned to us as the last one. So basically, that's how we use core data to save and to load information in a very simple way. What we might do now is attempt to create a a predicate, which is basically a search or a filter on the results. So let's attempt to create one of those now. I haven't actually done this yet, so this is kind of unscripted, this part of the video, so I'm just going to attempt to create one of these now. So after we've created our request, we need to add a predicate to that. I'm going to say request dot predicate equals ns predicate. That's going to take a format. Now the format for this is going to be username equals %at, and the first parameter. Now this takes an array of parameters. So for each of those %at signs that you add inside of the format, that will correspond to a position in the array of parameters that you pass in. So the parameter that I'm going to pass in is going to be txt username.text, and just to be safe, I might prepend that with an empty string like we had to do for the save method, just to make sure that that potentially works. And yeah, let's see if this works. So this is basically going to be our filter. The username is equal to the username that we put into the username field. So if I stop the application and run that again, assuming there was no text in the username field, we would get 0 results returned, potential error. But if I were to put Ryan's username into the field and press load, you'll see that we've successfully searched our database and pulled out the object that corresponds with that username. So since we've actually got an object coming back, we can get rid of this section here that loops through that, and we can populate the fields. So let's say text username dot text equals res.value for key. Actually, that's not going to work, is it? We need to say var res is going to be equal to results. Let's just take the first result for now, and we're going to cast that as a ns managed object. Then we can say res.value for key. The key is going to be username Oops. And txt password dot text is going to be equal. What's the issue here? There seems to be a small issue. Couldn't convert that into a string. Let's try prepending that with a string. Nope. What are we missing? That's very weird. Let's try using the new syntax for this and placing that inside of a backslash and then open braces like that. See if that helps. No, that looks like it's messing around with the compilers. Sorry, the IDE's real-time compiler. Okay, then I'm not too sure how we pluck that back out. Then results. Sorry, not results. It's going to be rest dot value for key. Ah, okay, I see what we need to do. We need to say username. Sorry about that, guys. Username, and then we need to say as string. We need to cast that back into a string for our text box, otherwise it won't like it. Txt password.text is going to be equal to rest.value for key. The key is going to be password. That's going to be as a string as well. String. So now when we search through our database, we are basically going to say if we do have a result coming back, pluck out the first one and then basically append that information into the username text box and the password text box. So let's run our application again and have a look what happens. So if I were to search for Ryan's username and press load, you'll see that Ryan's password comes back. Now let's create some more data. I'm just going to add a test user, and we're going to give that a password of 123456, and you'll see that's been successfully created. And I'm going to add another user that's going to have a password of ABCDEFG. I'm going to save that as well. Now if I close the application on our phone, you should see that persistent storage is taking care of this for us. Let me get rid of these applications that aren't running anymore. So you see the application's being closed. If we open the application again and we were to search for Ryan's username and press load, you'll see my password comes back. If we search for test user and press load, you'll see that the appropriate password comes back as well. And if we search for another user and press load, you'll see that their password comes back as well. So that's been the basics of core data inside of Swift using the Xcode 6 beta and the iOS 8 SDK beta. Thank you guys for watching. Please like the video and subscribe. Also share this around on any Swift communities you find, and leave any comments and questions in the description. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Bye.